The morning after the flood felt like waking up inside someone else's nightmare. The once peaceful valley was now a twisted landscape of destruction.
Coming this way, move!
Mud covered everything, fences were bent like paper clips, cars lay half buried, debris floated where manicured lawns used to be. The HOA clubhouse, which had been the symbol of Diane's authority, now stood broken and waterlogged, with its windows shattered and foundation cracked beyond repair. The smell of wet soil, oil, and sewage hung thick in the air, mixing with the faint sound of weeping and shouting as residents tried to make sense of what had happened. I stood on the hill beside the sheriff, watching rescue boats move through the flooded streets that had once been driveways. A camera drone buzzed nearby, capturing every angle for the news stations already broadcasting live from the chaos. By mid-morning, headlines were everywhere. HOA demolition causes flood disaster. Oak Valley estates underwater. Private HOA faces criminal inquiry. The sheriff, tired and mud-spattered, turned to me. "They really did it, huh?" he muttered. "Every inch of this points back to them." I nodded silently, handing him my phone again to show him the video clips bulldozers tearing at the embankment. Diane's white SUV parked at the site, her calm face as the water began to spill. "This is proof," he said, frowning. "But you know they're going to fight it. She's going to claim you tampered with something." I sighed. "She already is." Just then, I noticed Diane approaching, her pristine beige coat smeared with mud, her face pale but full of venom. She didn't even glance at the sheriff. "You did this, Richard," she snapped, voice trembling with rage. "You weakened that dam yourself to get revenge." "That's a lie, and you know it," I replied coldly. "You sent those machines onto my land. You destroyed a legal structure. You caused this flood. Your structure was dangerous." She shot back. "The HOA acted in the community's interest. You neglected your responsibilities and refused to pay your share of the maintenance fees." The sheriff stepped forward. "Ma'am, you had no jurisdiction. You violated county code by conducting an unauthorized demolition." She turned toward the cameras, changing her tone instantly, voice cracking as she pretended to cry. "We were just trying to protect our families," she said dramatically. "We didn't know the dam was unstable." Reporters swarmed her, flashing cameras and shouting questions. I could tell she was playing the victim card, twisting the narrative before the real investigation even started. I clenched my jaw and walked away, not wanting to feed her performance. Back at my house, I sat on the porch staring at the empty valley where the lake used to be. The silence was heavier than the sound of rushing water had ever been. My family's legacy was gone, replaced by ruin. My phone wouldn't stop buzzing reporters, insurance agents, and even old friends calling to ask what really happened. One voicemail stood out. It was from a man named Tom Garrison, an environmental attorney who had seen the footage online. "Mr. Hale," he said, "I specialize in property law and environmental damage claims. I saw the broadcast. If your dam was legally registered, we might have a case not just for property loss but criminal negligence on their part. Call me." I did, and within hours, Tom drove down from the city to meet me. He was sharp, direct, and he didn't mince words. "They're done for," he said after reviewing the permits and the deed I'd kept for decades. The HOA had zero legal authority to touch this. The county didn't issue any demolition notice, and from what I see here, they also violated federal water management laws by tampering with a regulated structure. He leaned back in his chair, smirking. "They thought they could scare you into compliance. Now, they've committed one of the biggest property crimes I've ever seen." It felt like hope, but I didn't celebrate yet. Diane was cunning, and I knew she had connections in the county office. Sure enough, by the next morning, the HOA released a statement blaming an independent contractor for the unauthorized demolition. Claiming they had no prior knowledge and fully cooperated with county authorities, the lie spread fast. I turned on the news to see Diane sitting in front of her half-destroyed clubhouse giving interviews, saying the dam collapsed naturally after years of neglect. My blood boiled. She had turned her crime into a sympathy campaign. Residents were confused and divided. Some believed her, others didn't. A few even came up to my property asking questions, saying things like, "Didn't you refuse to fix it when they asked?" And maybe it was just old age. I invited them in, showed them the legal papers and the footage of the HOA's bulldozers. Their faces changed immediately. "Oh my God," one woman whispered. "They really did this." I uploaded everything online, that night: videos, documents, inspection reports, timestamps, everything. Within 24 hours, my post had over 200,000 views. People were furious. Commenters flooded the HOA's Facebook page, demanding accountability. The hashtag Oak Valley Flood trended regionally. But the HOA board still tried to spin it, hiring a PR firm to release polished statements and threatening legal action against false narratives. Underestimated how much evidence I had. The sheriff's department soon confirmed that the heavy machinery used in the demolition had been rented using the HOA's business account. The receipt even had Diane's signature on it. That single detail flipped everything. Suddenly, the county district attorney was involved. Investigators showed up, collecting soil samples, interviewing residents, and taking statements from witnesses who had seen Diane at the dam that morning. She tried to distance herself, claiming the equipment had been used for routine landscaping. But the video footage was damning. Tom, my lawyer, smiled when the news broke. "This is the kind of arrogance that buries itself," he said. Still, I wasn't celebrating yet. I'd lived long enough to know people like Diane didn't crumble easily. They plotted, schemed, and found scapegoats. A few days later, I got a strange letter in the mail with no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper with typed words, "You think this is over?" The dam was just the beginning. I showed it to Tom, who told me to keep it safe. He suspected Diane, or someone loyal to her, was trying to intimidate me. But I wasn't scared. They'd already taken everything I loved. There was nothing left for them to destroy except themselves. Then something unexpected happened. A group of HOA residents, led by a man named Chris Larkin, came to my house, asking if I'd join a community meeting they were organizing without Diane's approval. "We're done being bullied," Chris said. "She ruined our homes and blamed you. We've seen the evidence. We want her gone." That meeting became the spark of something bigger. Dozens of homeowners gathered at the local school gym, frustrated and angry, demanding a vote to dissolve the current HOA board. News reporters caught wind and showed up again, filming residents shouting at Diane, who tried to maintain control but looked pale and shaken. Her empire was crumbling in front of everyone. I stayed quiet, watching from the back of the room as she was confronted by her own neighbors. "You lied to us," one man yelled. "You said the county ordered it. You took our dues and destroyed our homes," shouted another. Diane tried to defend herself, but her voice was drowned out by the chaos. It was poetic, just as public humiliation for a woman who once ruled with fear. That night, the board voted unanimously to suspend her position pending the county's investigation. For the first time in years, the HOA didn't have Diane at the helm. But deep down, I knew she wouldn't disappear quietly. I could see it in her eyes as she left the meeting hall. She wasn't beaten, just cornered. And when people like her are cornered, they strike back harder than ever. The real battle for Oak Valley was only just beginning. They should have never touched what wasn't theirs. If they'd listened when I warned them, Oak Valley would still be standing today. But the HOA thought they owned everything: the roads, the land, even the water that flowed through my property. And when they decided to demolish my dam for unpaid fees, they didn't realize they were destroying the very thing holding their perfect neighborhood together. If you love stories where arrogance meets karma, make sure you're subscribed to Sham Stories, because this one will leave you speechless. My name is Richard Hale, and I built Oak Valley Dam with my own 2 hands 20 years ago. Back then, this place wasn't some shiny gated community run by a power-hungry board. It was a stretch of farmland and forest fed by a natural spring that ran through my family's property. I built the dam to collect and redirect that water, turning dry acres into fertile land and a beautiful lake that attracted families looking for peace and scenery. When the housing developers came, they begged me to sell. I agreed on one condition: the dam stays, and I keep ownership and maintenance rights. They signed the papers, but the new HOA didn't like that. They saw me as some stubborn old farmer squatting on their postcard perfect lakefront. The HOA president, a woman named Diane Morris, was the kind of person who smiled at you like you were dirt on her shoe. She ran the HOA like a queen, commanding her subjects, sending fines for lawn colors, mailbox sizes, and even for kids riding bikes too loudly. I lived just outside the official HOA zone, but the dam sat within it, and that drove her crazy. She wanted total control of everything visible from her so-called community map. At first, they tried to buy me out. Then they threatened lawsuits, claiming the dam was unsafe or unauthorized, even though it had county approval for decades. I kept every permit and document filed neatly in a folder thicker than a phone book. They didn't care. They wanted me gone. The tension built slowly. Letters in my mailbox, anonymous complaints to the county, strangers taking photos near my fence. One day I found a bright orange notice nailed to the dam gate. HOA order authorized structure subject to removal. I laughed it off, thinking it was another one of Diane's intimidation tactics, but I was wrong. That night, I saw lights moving near the water. When I grabbed my flashlight and rifle and walked down, I saw 3 men in construction gear standing near the spillway with a backhoe. They weren't county workers. They weren't contractors I'd hired. They had HOA badges clipped to their vests. "You're trespassing," I shouted. The oldest one turned, looking smug under the beam of my flashlight. "HOA authority," he said. "We have orders to begin demolition. You're in violation of Article 14, non-payment of maintenance fees." I laughed in disbelief. "You can't fine me for a dam you don't own," I said, stepping closer. "You're breaking the law," he just shrugged. "Then call the police." I did. But by the time deputies arrived, the men were gananned. They'd already dug into the side berm, loosening part of the embankment. The county sheriff, an old friend of mine, took photos and filed a report, but no one from the HOA admitted involvement. The next morning, I received an email from Diane herself. "You should have cooperated, Richard. We're only trying to maintain community safety." I replied with scanned copies of my ownership records, dam inspection certificates, and a not-so-subtle warning that if they touched my property again, I'd take them to court. Weeks passed and things got worse. HOA trucks started parking near my fence line, pretending to inspect easements. One evening, I came home to find my gate padlock cut and my water sensors ripped out. Then, the unthinkable happened. On a quiet Wednesday morning, while I was out checking the water level, I heard a low rumble from the west side of the dam. I turned and saw heavy machinery rolling in 3 excavators, a bulldozer and several workers in yellow vests marked with the HOA logo. Diane was there in her pearl-white SUV, sipping coffee like she was watching a show. I ran toward them, yelling over the noise, "Stop! You can't do this. You'll flood the valley." But they ignored me. One of the operators looked nervous but followed orders, scooping into the clay sidewall. I felt the earth vibrate under my boots. "This is illegal." I shouted again. "You don't have county authorization." Diane rolled down her window and smirked. "You didn't pay your community dues, Richard. Actions have consequences." Before I could get closer, 2 men stepped between us, pretending to be security. I called 911, but the dispatcher said county jurisdiction didn't apply within. HOA managed property boundaries until proof of private ownership was confirmed. I stood there helpless as they tore open the side of my dam. Water started to leak through the breach, slow at first, then faster. I could hear the crack of soil giving way, the hiss of pressure releasing from decades of stored water. I backed away, shouting again, "You're going to destroy everything." But Diane just watched, sipping her coffee, her eyes cold. Within minutes, the first section of the dam broke loose. The spillway collapsed with a deafening roar as thousands of gallons of water surged downhill. The current ripped through trees and fences, swallowing everything in its path. I scrambled back up the ridge to safety, choking on the mist and dust. When the chaos settled, my heart sank. The lake was gone. The valley below, what used to be my family's farmland, was a muddy wasteland. But the water didn't stop there. It followed gravity straight toward Oak Valley Estates. Diane and her board members, so proud of their perfect lawns and manicured gardens, didn't realize the natural slope of the land funneled runoff directly toward their neighborhood. Within an hour, the lower streets were under 3 feet of water. Cars floated. Yards vanished. By sunset, the HOA clubhouse was submerged halfway up its windows. I stood on the ridge, drenched, shaking with disbelief and anger. It wasn't satisfaction I felt, it was horror. They had unleashed something they couldn't control. I tried calling emergency services again, but lines were jammed. The sheriff finally arrived after nightfall and found me near the ruins of the dam. He stared at the destruction, then at me. "What happened here?" I handed him my phone with photos I'd taken of the bulldozers, the HOA trucks, Diane's SUV, parked on site. "They did this," I said quietly. "They said I owed them fees," he exhaled, shaking his head. "They're going to pay for this, Richard. Every last one of them." That night, I sat on my porch, listening to the distant wail of sirens echoing from the drowned valley. For 20 years, that dam protected this land, controlled the flow, and kept the community safe. Now, it was going to end. So was their illusion of control. But deep down, I knew this wasn't over. People like Diane don't admit defeat. They manipulate, twist, and hide behind bureaucracy. What she didn't know was that the sheriff wasn't the only one who saw what happened that day. Several residents had filmed the demolition, and the footage was already spreading online. The HOA had declared war, and now the world was about to see what they'd done. The days following Diane's conviction were supposed to feel like victory, but instead, they felt heavy with dread. Even behind bars, her words echoed in my head, "The dam always breaks twice." It didn't make sense at first, but the unease it stirred wouldn't let me rest. The sheriff assured me she was being held in county jail, awaiting sentencing. But something about the way she'd smiled when they took her away still haunted me. Tom tried to convince me to relax. "It's over, Richard," he said, sipping his coffee in his office as news of her conviction dominated the local headlines. "She's finished. You've won. The county's already started negotiating compensation for the damage." But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that Diane wasn't done. Evil like hers didn't just vanish. It waited, it plotted, it adapted. A week later, a small article buried in the local section caught my eye. Former HOA president hospitalized after collapse in jail. The report said she'd suffered a mild heart episode and was transferred to the county medical wing for observation. That should have comforted me, but it only made me more anxious. 2 nights later, I woke up to the sound of an engine outside my window. I grabbed my flashlight and hurried to the porch, just in time to see headlights disappearing down the dirt road. When I walked toward the dam site, I saw fresh footprints in the mud and cigarette butts near the fence lines. Someone had been watching again. The next morning, deputies checked the area, but there were no signs of forced entry. "Probably kids messing around," one said, but I could see the doubt in his eyes. I spent the rest of the day reinforcing locks, placing the batteries on all the security cameras, and installing new floodlights. That night, the rain returned, light at first, then heavier, as thunder rolled across the valley. Around midnight, as lightning lit the hills, my phone buzzed with a notification motion detected near the dam. I opened the live feed and froze. 2 figures were standing at the base of the dam ruins, their outlines illuminated by flashes of lightning. One held a shovel. The other was crouched, doing something near the waterline. I zoomed in, trying to get a clearer view, but the feed glitched from interference. I called the sheriff immediately, who promised to send a unit, but by the time they arrived, the figures were gone. What they left behind, though, made my stomach twist. A pile of pipes, tools, and industrial sealant. Someone had been tampering with the remains of the dam. The sheriff looked at me grimly. "Someone's trying to set something up here," he said. "We'll keep patrols tighter." But his voice lacked confidence. The following morning, Tom called. "You're not going to believe this," he said. "Diane's lawyer filed a motion claiming that the dam was structurally unsafe before the demolition, and she's demanding a new trial based on newly discovered evidence." I could hardly speak. "What evidence?" I asked. "She's producing new witness statements," he said, "and claiming the flood wasn't caused by her decision, but by hidden defects in your dam." My blood ran cold. That's what those men at the site had been doing. They were planting fake evidence. I told Tom about the figures I'd seen and the equipment left behind. He immediately filed an injunction, demanding an investigation before any new filings could proceed. But the story didn't stay quiet. Within hours, an anonymous blog posted exclusive photos of supposed cracks and weak spots in the dam's remains, claiming I had ignored maintenance responsibilities. I knew those photos were staged, but online perceptions spun fast. Neighbors who had once stood by me now started whispering doubts. Some even accused me of causing the flood intentionally to get revenge. My phone filled with hateful messages, and my name was dragged through social media mud once again. Diane, even from a hospital bed, was managing to poison public opinion. Tom urged me to stay calm, but I could see how tired he was. "We'll get through this," he said, though his tone lacked the conviction it once had. Days turned into a blur of legal filings, interviews, and sleepless nights. The rain kept coming, filling the ruined basin inch by inch until the muddy valley started to resemble a lake again. Then, one stormy evening, I heard a knock at the door. When I opened it, a delivery man stood there holding a large, padded envelope. "Delivery for Richard Evans," he said. "No sender listed." I took it inside and carefully opened it. Inside was a flash drive and a single printed note that read, "If you want the truth, play it." Against my better judgment, I plugged it into my computer. The video that appeared made my jaw drop. It was drone footage again this time, showing two men at the dam the same night I'd seen them, digging near the base. But then the drone moved closer, and I could see a third figure standing back near the truck, watching them. It was Diane. She was wearing a hood, but her face caught in the lightning confirmed it. Somehow, she wasn't in the hospital that night she had been here. I called the sheriff immediately, sending them the video. Within hours, deputies swarmed the property again, collecting every scrap of evidence. The sheriff looked furious. "This footage proves she's been violating her release conditions. We'll bring this to the DA first thing tomorrow." But the next morning, I received the most shocking call yet. Diane had vanished. The hospital reported she'd checked out against medical advice 2 nights prior and disappeared. They assumed she'd gone into hiding. The sheriff issued an all-points bulletin, but she seemed to have evaporated into thin air. The tension across Oak Valley spiked again. Those who hadn't yet abandoned the neighborhood now lived in fear. Rumors spread that Diane had been spotted in nearby towns, disguised, moving at night. I didn't know what to believe anymore. I barely slept, too afraid she'd show up at my door again. 2 nights later, during another storm, the sound of rushing water jolted me awake. I ran to the window and felt my heart stop. The dam site was flooding again, but this time from beneath. Water was bubbling up from underground channels, swirling faster with every passing second. I grabbed my raincoat and flashlight, sprinting toward the site. The ground trembled under my boots, the air thick with the roar of water breaking free. When I reached the dam remains, I saw what had happened. Someone had reopened the drainage culverts beneath the foundation, which I'd sealed after the collapse. The water pressure had built up from weeks of rain, and now it was bursting through. I called 911, shouting into the wind as lightning split the sky. Within minutes, sirens wailed in the distance. Deputies and county engineers arrived, struggling to contain the surge, but it was too late. The valley began filling rapidly again, mud and debris cascading downstream toward Oak Valley Estates. I shouted above the chaos, "It's happening again." Someone sabotaged it. The sheriff grabbed my arm. "Get back to your house," he ordered. "This whole section's about to go." I ran as water swallowed the ground behind me. The sound was deafening, a violent mix of thunder, breaking earth, and panic. By dawn, the rain stopped, but the damage was catastrophic. The entire neighborhood, once rebuilt partially after the first flood, was under several feet of water again. Homes floated, cars stacked against each other, and the HOA clubhouse rebuilt only months earlier was gone. As the sun rose over the devastation, I stood there drenched, speechless, watching everything sink a second time. This wasn't an accident. Diane's words now made perfect, horrifying sense. The dam had broken twice. Weeks passed, and the chaos only deepened. The insurance companies refused to cover the damage, claiming the HOA had committed willful negligence. The county attorney prepared a lawsuit, and every news outlet from local channels to national networks kept the story alive. Reporters camped outside my property day and night, hoping for a quote, but I stayed silent. I had nothing to prove. The truth was unfolding by itself. The homeowners, once obedient followers of Diane's every command, now saw her for what she truly was, a tyrant who let her pride drown their homes. Many of them came to my gate in tears, apologizing, begging for help to rebuild, even offering to testify on my behalf. I treated them kindly, but kept my distance. I'd warned them for months what the HOA was capable of, and they'd turned away. Now, they were paying the price. Still, I couldn't find joy in their suffering. I had lost my land, my home, and the dam that had been my grandfather's legacy. At night, I'd sit by the edge of what used to be the lake, the air still heavy with dampness and the faint smell of decay, and I'd think about everything that had led to this. Diane, on the other hand, was spiraling. She had been publicly disgraced. The HOA board had resigned one by one, and now she stood alone, facing charges of trespassing, destruction of private property, and reckless endangerment. She still drove around the wrecked neighborhood every morning, wearing sunglasses and pretending she was in control, but everyone saw through the act. One afternoon, I was summoned to the county courthouse to give a statement. Inside the sterile courtroom, Diane sat across from me, her lawyer whispering frantically in her ear. When she finally looked up, our eyes met hers, filled with exhaustion and fear. The judge listened as the prosecutor described the sequence of events, showing photos of the heavy machinery, the emails Diane had sent authorizing the demolition, and the video I'd captured from my security cameras. It was damning evidence. Diane's lawyer tried to argue that I hadn't paid community infrastructure dues, which allegedly gave the HOA authority over my property. But when the county land officer took the stand, he clarified that my parcel had been exempt since the 1960s. That single statement sealed her fate. The judge's expression hardened as he read through the documents, then slammed the gavel. Diane was found guilty on all counts, pending sentencing. She paled, trembling as the courtroom gasped. Outside, reporters rushed us, microphones flashing, cameras blinding. "Mr. Carter, do you have anything to say to the residents of Oak Valley?" One shouted. I paused, then simply said, "Actions have consequences," and walked away. But justice, as I soon learned, wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of reckoning. The county condemned large sections of the neighborhood due to structural instability. Cracks formed under the roads, sinkholes opened near the clubhouse, and even months after the flood, the land refused to settle. It was as though nature itself refused to forgive what they'd done. The residents scrambled to sell what was left, but property values had plummeted. Oak Valley, once the picture of suburban perfection, had turned into a ghost town. I received several offers to sell what remained of my property to developers, but I refused. That land was more than dirt. It was history. My father had built the first section of the dam with his own hands, using nothing but timber and stone, and I'd spent my life maintaining it. The thought of giving it up felt like betrayal. Still, rebuilding seemed impossible. The damage was immense. One evening, as I was packing some documents in the barn, I heard a car pull up. It was one of the former HOA board members, Evelyn, a quiet woman who had always disagreed with Diane, but never had the courage to stand up to her. She handed me a folder and said softly, "You should see this." Inside were records of financial mismanagement, emails between Diane and a contractor showing kickbacks, and receipts that proved she'd used HOA funds for personal expenses. "Why are you giving this to me?" I asked. Evelyn looked tired. "Because people need to know the truth. She destroyed all of us." Her eyes welled with tears as she turned and walked away. That night, I sat at my kitchen table going through every page. It was worse than I imagined. Tens of thousands of dollars missing. Multiple fake invoices, even a private account Diane had set up under the HOA's name. It was theft, plain and simple. The next morning, I delivered the evidence to the district attorney's office. Within days, new charges were filed against Diane, this time for embezzlement and fraud. When the news broke, it became the final nail in her coffin. Neighbors who had once defended her now publicly denounced her, and the HOA's reputation was destroyed forever. But despite the chaos, a strange peace began to settle over me. For the first time in months, The constant anger that had burned in my chest started to fade. I spent my days clearing debris, helping a few remaining residents salvage what they could, and rebuilding the small creek diversion that had once fed into the dam. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about restoration. Late one evening, as the sun dipped behind the broken horizon, I saw something unexpected, a small stream of water trickling naturally through the valley again, carving its own path through the mud and debris. Nature was healing, slowly but surely. I stood there, hands in my pockets, feeling the breeze on my face, and realized that maybe everything had to fall apart for the truth to surface. Diane's greed had drowned her, literally and figuratively. And though I had lost so much, I still had what mattered: my integrity, my name, and my land. But something told me this wasn't the end just yet. There were still hidden players in the game, ones who had quietly profited from the HOA's fall, waiting for the perfect time to strike again. I could feel it in my gut, like a storm brewing far beyond the horizon. The valley was quiet now, but silence had a way of whispering warnings to those who listened closely. Days passed, but the smell of rotten mud never left the air. Every time the wind blew from the valley, it carried with it a reminder of what the HOA had done. Diane's absence from public life lasted only 2 days before she re-emerged online. With a carefully edited video filmed against the backdrop of her damaged house, in it, she blamed the HOA's demolition team entirely, claiming she had been misled by contractors and never authorized the project herself. She ended the video with crocodile tears and a plea for donations to help the victims of the Oak Valley disaster. Watching it made my stomach turn. The comment section was divided, half of them calling her a fraud, the other half sympathizing with her carefully crafted victim image. Tom, my attorney, warned me to stay calm. She's playing for sympathy now, he said. But public perception doesn't matter as much as the investigation. The DA is building a strong case, and when this goes to court, that video will work against her. Still, I couldn't help but feel the injustice clawing at my nerves. The media seemed more interested in her sob story than the truth about the dam. It took another week before the county's official report was released, confirming that the HOA had conducted an unauthorized demolition that directly led to the flooding. The document was clear and cold, stating that the act was a violation of county engineering laws and property rights. That same afternoon, police arrived at Diane's home with a warrant. The news cameras were there, recording as she was led out in handcuffs, still trying to smile for the reporters. The sight of her pretending to stay composed while the crowd shouted at her should have felt satisfying, but instead I just felt numb. Watching her downfall didn't bring back my land, my dam, or the memories it held. The sheriff nodded at me across the street as they put her in the back of the patrol car. She'll have her day in court, he said, and so will you. But I had no idea that Diane's arrest wasn't the end. It was just the start of a much darker chapter. That night, my phone buzzed with dozens of texts from neighbors thanking me for exposing her. Yet, among the supportive messages, there was one anonymous text that made my skin crawl. You made a powerful enemy. I didn't tell Tom right away, figuring it was just one of Diane's loyalists trying to intimidate me. But then, strange things started happening. My mailbox was torn out one morning. The tires of my truck were slashed. Someone spray-painted traitor on the side of my fence. The sheriff sent deputies to patrol my property, but whoever was behind it always stayed one step ahead, vanishing before they arrived. The tension in the valley grew unbearable. The remaining HOA board members tried to distance themselves from Diane, but the community was collapsing under lawsuits and insurance chaos. People were leaving Oak Valley, packing up their ruined homes and fleeing the legal mess. Houses went up for sale at half their value, and property prices plummeted. What had once been a pristine, proud neighborhood was now a ghost town surrounded by mud and broken trust. I wanted to move too, but something in me refused. This was my land, my family's heritage, and no corrupt HOA was going to chase me away. One evening, as I sat on the porch watching the sun set over the muddy remains of the lake bed, I heard a car stop at the end of my driveway. It was Chris Larkin, the neighbor who had helped organize the revolt against Diane. He stepped out, looking worn but determined. "You should know something," he said quietly. Diane's out on bail. She's not supposed to contact anyone involved, but I heard she's been making calls from a burner phone. Some of the board members are scared. They think she's planning something. I frowned. What could she possibly do now? She's ruined. Chris shook his head. People like her don't stop. They find ways to keep their power. I heard she's meeting with an attorney from out of state, trying to pin this whole thing on a contractor. It made sense. Diane had always been manipulative enough to twist the truth until it suited her. But I couldn't imagine who would still defend her after everything that happened. Then, a few days later, a black SUV pulled up outside my gate. Two men in suits stepped out, introducing themselves as investigators from a private insurance firm. They said they were assessing liability claims for the flood, but something about them felt off. They asked strange questions, not about the dam's structure or maintenance, but about whether I had ever threatened the HOA or spoken to anyone about revenge. I answered politely, but the more they talked, the clearer it became. They weren't investigators. They were trying to build a case that I'd sabotaged my own dam. After they left, I called Tom immediately. Sighed. That's Diane's new tactic. She's trying to shift blame. She can convince the insurance company or the media that you tampered with the dam before it was destroyed. It complicates the charges against her, but that's insane, I said. She has no evidence. Doesn't matter, Tom replied grimly. She just needs doubt. Doubt slows everything down. True enough, within days, a new headline appeared online. Was Oak Valley Dam a setup? Sources claim landowner ignored safety warnings. The article quoted an unnamed HOA representative. It didn't take a genius to know who that was. My stomach twisted as I read the lies printed under my name. I felt like I was drowning all over again, this time in rumors instead of water. Tom worked fast, filing defamation notices and sending out evidence packets to every outlet that ran the story. Slowly, public opinion began to turn back in our favor. The sheriff publicly confirmed that their investigation cleared me of any wrongdoing. But Diane wasn't finished. Late one night, I woke to the sound of gravel crunching outside. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped onto the porch. A shadow moved near my barn. "Who's there?" shouted, but there was no answer. Just the sound of footsteps fading into the trees. The next morning, I found tire tracks leading to the back fence and on my front door. Someone had nailed a wooden sign that read, "You should have left when you had the chance." That's when I realized this wasn't just about revenge or money anymore. Diane had crossed into obsession. Tom urged me to install security cameras, which I did, covering every inch of the property. For a while, things went quiet. Then one morning, I checked the footage from the previous night and froze. There she was, Diane herself, standing at the edge of my driveway around midnight, staring directly into one of the cameras. She didn't move for nearly 5 minutes, just stood there in the dark, her face pale and hollow, before finally turning and walking away. I sent the footage to the sheriff immediately. They issued a warning to her attorney, but she denied everything, saying I had doctored the video. It was unbelievable. How could someone so exposed still be that bold? But deep down, I knew Diane wasn't acting out of confidence anymore. She was desperate. Her world was crumbling, and I was the last person she could blame for it. A week later, the trial date was announced, and the entire county buzzed with anticipation. The charges against her included unauthorized demolition, reckless endangerment, and destruction of private property. I was listed as the primary witness. On the morning of the hearing, I walked into the courthouse surrounded by reporters, flashes popping all around. Diane was already there, sitting beside her lawyer, wearing a navy blue suit that looked too clean for someone accused of drowning an entire neighborhood. When she turned her head and saw me, she smiled faintly, not a warm smile, but one filled with cold, quiet hatred. The testimony dragged on for hours as engineers, residents, and officials took the stand. When my turn came, I told the story from the beginning, how she'd harassed me over HOA dues, how she'd trespassed, and finally how she'd sent those machines onto my land. The courtroom was silent as the video evidence played on the screen. The sound of the bulldozers, the cracking of the dam wall, the first gush of water, it all echoed through the room like a haunting memory. But Diane's lawyer tried to discredit me, suggesting I'd provoked the situation, or faked the video. But Tom's calm cross-examination dismantled every argument. By the end of the day, it was clear who was responsible. As the court adjourned for the evening, Diane passed by me on her way out. She leaned close enough for only me to hear and whispered, "You think you've won, but this isn't over. You'll wish that dam had taken you too." Her words chilled me to the bone. I watched her walk out into the night, her silhouette framed by the courthouse lights. I realized the flood might have destroyed the valley, but Diane's hatred was far from drowned. The night after the first day of trial, I barely slept. Diane's words echoed in my head like a curse. Even though she was facing years in prison, her tone carried the same confidence she'd always had, as if she still believed she controlled everything. I sat by the window watching the moonlight shimmer over the muddy remains of the old lake bed, and I wondered how much more destruction she could possibly bring. The next morning, when I arrived at court, something felt off. Reporters were clustered near the entrance, whispering anxiously, their cameras not yet rolling. Tom walked up beside me, his expression grim. "There's been an incident," he said quietly. "One of the contractors who testified yesterday, Mark Whitaker, was found dead early this morning. The police think it was an accident, but he didn't have to finish the sentence." We both knew Diane had powerful connections, and even from behind her attorney's desk, she might still have influence. Inside the courtroom, whispers spread like wildfire. Diane arrived late, escorted by her lawyer, but she looked strangely calm, almost smug. When the judge asked if she was aware of the contractor's death, she acted shocked, even gasped for dramatic effect. Tom squeezed my shoulder, signaling me not to react. The hearing proceeded, but the tension was thick enough to choke on. Witness after witness described how Diane had manipulated the board, ignored legal boundaries, and refused to stop the demolition, despite repeated warnings. Still, her lawyer fought hard, objecting to everything, twisting statements, and insinuating that everyone was out to get her. By midday, the court adjourned for lunch, and I stepped outside to clear my head. A group of reporters immediately swarmed me, shoving microphones in my face, asking whether I believed Diane was responsible for the contractor's death. I refused to answer, brushing past them toward the parking lot. But as I reached my truck, I noticed a small envelope tucked under the windshield wiper. No postage, no name, just my name written in red ink across the front. My pulse quickened as I opened it. Inside was a single photo, a snapshot of me standing by my porch, taken from a distance. With the words scrawled in black marker underneath, "You can't damn what's coming." My hands trembled. Someone had been near my property again, close enough to take that picture. I called the sheriff immediately, and within minutes, deputies were dispatched to check the area. They found fresh tire tracks near the fence line, the same pattern as before SUV tires. Likely the same vehicle from the last time Diane appeared in the security footage. The sheriff looked concerned. "We'll get a patrol unit watching your property at night," he said. "Until the trial's over, don't take any chances." That evening, I sat with Tom in his office, going over our statements for the next session. He looked exhausted, dark circles under his eyes, his tie loosened. "She's unraveling," he said. "But people like her don't break quietly. If she's behind these threats, she's trying to push you into making a mistake before the verdict." I nodded, gripping the edge of the desk. "She already made one mistake too many," I said. "She took everything from me once. I'm not letting her scare me again." The next day of court began with new evidence. County investigators presented records showing that Diane had transferred HOA funds into a private account just 2 days before the demolition. Her lawyer tried to claim it was an administrative oversight, but the paper trail was undeniable. I watched her jaw tighten as the prosecutor revealed the time-stamped transactions. The tension in the room was electric. Still, she didn't flinch. She sat upright, eyes burning holes through the screen where the numbers appeared. When it was time for closing arguments, Tom stood and addressed the court. His voice was steady and powerful, the kind that commanded attention without ever needing to shout. "This case isn't just about a dam," he said. "It's about control. It's about what happens when someone thinks the law doesn't apply to them, when arrogance replaces accountability. My client lost everything because this HOA decided to play God with someone's property. And the result wasn't just destruction, It was devastation. The jury watched him closely, every word sinking in like a stone dropping into deep water. When he finished, Diane's lawyer rose for his rebuttal. He painted her as a victim of bad advice, a misunderstood leader who acted with good intentions but poor judgment. It was a desperate performance, but Diane's expression never wavered. She seemed detached, almost serene, like she already knew the outcome. The judge announced that deliberation would begin the following morning. As the courtroom emptied, Diane caught my gaze once more. This time, she didn't speak. She just smiled faintly, a knowing, sinister smile that sent a chill straight down my spine. I drove home under a heavy sky, rain beginning to fall, tapping against the windshield in slow rhythmic beats. When I reached my property, the deputy's patrol car was parked near the gate. He waved at me, and I waved back, grateful for the watchful presence. But as I pulled into the driveway, I noticed something glinting near the dam's remains. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped out into the drizzle. The ground was slick with mud, but something metallic caught the beam of my lighted drone, half buried in the dirt. I picked it up carefully, recognizing it as a high-end surveillance model. The memory card was still inside. My heart pounded as I plugged it into my laptop inside the house. The footage showed hours of nighttime recording shots of my property, my barn, my truck, but the last clip froze me cold. It was dated 2 nights ago, showing Diane standing in the same spot again, staring toward my house. She wasn't alone this time. 2 men stood beside her, both wearing black jackets with indistinguishable logos. They seemed to be surveying the area. Then the camera tilted slightly as if the drone had been hit by something, and the footage cut off. I backed away from the screen, my mind racing. Diane wasn't just watching me, she was planning something. I called Tom immediately and told him about the footage. "Don't go anywhere tonight," he warned. "Lock everything. I'll have someone from the sheriff's department come pick that card up first thing in the morning." I did as he said, locking every door and window, keeping my shotgun close just in case. The storm outside grew worse, wind howling through the trees, rain slamming against the roof. Around midnight, I heard the faint crunch of tires again. My pulse jumped. I turned off the lights and peered through the blinds. Headlights flickered at the edge of the property, then disappeared. I waited, every nerve in my body on edge, until finally the sound faded. By dawn, the storm had passed, but the unease in my chest lingered. When the deputies arrived to collect the drone, they promised to trace its serial number. That afternoon, the court reconvened for the final verdict. The jury filed in, faces expressionless, as the judge asked if they had reached a decision. My heart hammered in my chest as the foreman stood. "We find the defendant, Diane Wallace, guilty on all counts." The room erupted in murmurs. Diane didn't move for several seconds. Then she turned slowly toward me, her eyes cold and empty. For the first time, I saw something resembling defeat, but not remorse. The judge set sentencing for the following week and ordered her immediate custody. As the bailiff approached, she rose to her feet, and in a voice barely above a whisper, she said, "You think you've won? But the dam always breaks twice." It was such an odd thing to say that for a moment I thought I'd misheard her, but the chill in her tone told me it wasn't random. She was warning me. Months passed and the scars of Oak Valley's destruction faded only on the surface. Nature reclaimed what man had ruined. Wildflowers grew through cracked concrete, and willows began sprouting where lawns once stood. The lake that had vanished was slowly returning, formed naturally by rainfall and the small diversion I'd rebuilt with my own hands. Life had a strange way of circling back, though never exactly the same. I had almost found peace again when an unexpected letter arrived in my mailbox. It was stamped with the seal of a development corporation I didn't recognize. Inside was an offer to purchase my entire property, far higher than anything I'd been offered before. The letter claimed that the company wanted to revitalize Oak Valley into a sustainable lakeside community. I frowned as I read it, sensing something wrong. I checked the company name Lakeshore Renewal LLC and realized it was newly formed, registered only a month ago. A little digging revealed that the listed contact person was none other than Diane's husband, Mark Peterson, who had quietly moved to another state after the trial. My pulse quickened. Even after losing everything, they were trying to come back using a new name and a clean slate. I decided not to respond, but instead reached out to the district attorney and shared the letter. A week later, I was called in for another meeting. They'd already been investigating similar offers sent to other landowners nearby, trying to snatch up cheap parcels under false pretenses. Mark had been funneling money through shell accounts, and Diane, even under house arrest, was suspected of orchestrating the operation from behind the scenes. It was a desperate attempt to rebuild control, and this time, I wasn't going to let it happen. Working with investigators, I agreed to cooperate quietly, providing evidence and communication records. We set up a controlled response and agreement meeting in which I would negotiate with a representative from the company. The meeting took place at a downtown law office. A well-dressed man named Robert entered, shaking my hand politely, pretending he was a neutral broker. But as the conversation went on, I caught his slip-ups references to our previous site, reconstruction budgets, and even the HOA data we lost. It was all there, hidden in his words. I kept my expression neutral, recording everything on a concealed camera the DA had provided. When I finally mentioned that I knew Diane and Mark were behind it, his face drained of color. "You don't know what you're talking about," he muttered, gathering his papers. "This meeting's over," he stormed out, but within hours the authorities had him in custody. The dominoes fell fast after that. A week later, a warrant was issued for Mark's arrest in another state, and Diane's probation was revoked when her involvement surfaced. This time, there was no courtroom drama, no shouting crowd, just quiet, inevitable justice. When I received the news, I didn't celebrate. I simply walked to the edge of my property, where the rebuilt stream glistened under the morning light. I could see the faint reflection of the valley returning to life. The destruction had been catastrophic, but in its wake, something purer had emerged. Without the HOA's iron grip, residents who had stayed behind formed a small cooperative, working together instead of under rules. They invited me to join, but I declined. I wasn't interested in governance anymore. I just wanted peace. Still, I offered my help whenever they needed equipment or water from the creek. Slowly, a sense of real community replaced the empty show of order the HOA once claimed to represent. One afternoon, Evelyn stopped by again. She had found an old box in the clubhouse rubble documents showing that decades ago, before Oak Valley was even developed, the land had been part of a conservation easement. It was never supposed to be built on at all. The HOA's original founder had manipulated zoning laws to turn it into profit. I took the papers to the county, and after weeks of review, they confirmed it. The area was reclassified as a natural restoration zone. That meant no more developments, no more HOA, and most importantly, permanent protection of the valley's ecosystem. The irony wasn't lost on me. The same greed that had destroyed the dam had also preserved the land forever. Standing there one last time, I felt an odd sense of closure. I sold a small section of my remaining property to the county for a symbolic price of $1 and donated the rest as part of the restoration project. The land that once carried pain would now carry purpose. Diane's downfall became a case study in HOA corruption, taught in universities and shared in documentaries. Her name became synonymous with arrogance and destruction, while the Oak Valley tragedy became a warning across the nation. But I didn't care for fame. I kept to myself, living quietly by the water's edge, rebuilding a small cabin where my grandfathers used to stand. Each morning I'd hear the rush of the new stream, clear and gentle. It's no longer trapped by concrete, but free to flow wherever it pleased. One evening, as I watched the sun set over the water, a young reporter came to interview me for a follow-up story. She asked what message I'd want to share with homeowners everywhere. I thought for a long moment, then said, "Never let power replace purpose. A neighborhood should be built on trust, not control." She smiled and thanked me. And I realized the story wasn't just mine anymore. It belonged to everyone who'd ever stood up to injustice, no matter how small. As the months rolled on, Oak Valley transformed into a sanctuary for wildlife. The air grew cleaner, the water clearer, and for the first time in years, I slept without the weight of anger. One night, I heard frogs croaking near the creek, a sound that hadn't echoed since before the flood, and it made me smile. Life had come full circle. Justice had taken time, but it had arrived in its own quiet way. And though scars remained on the land, on the people, even in my heart they reminded me that survival wasn't about rebuilding what was lost, but about learning to live with what's left. As I closed the door of my cabin and looked one last time at the valley glowing under the moonlight, I whispered softly to myself, "They demolished my dam, but they couldn't break me." The sound of water carried my words away, merging with the wind that swept across the hills. It was finally over. The land had spoken, the truth had prevailed, and the ghosts of Oak Valley could rest. And if anyone ever asked me again what became of the HOA that thought they could own nature itself, I'd simply point to the still, shimmering water and say, "Look closer, it remembers everything." Subscribe to Sham Stories' YouTube channel for more gripping HOA revenge tales. Real justice stories and powerful lessons about standing up for what's right, because sometimes the calmest waters hide the deepest storms.